So what I want to talk to you guys about today, seeing as we're going into fall, is retouching fall photos and making sure that you have a reference photo. As you can see on the screen, I had a image that I retouched. Now, when I take photographs, I do bursts. And what that means is I will go through and take multiple of the same image. Um, I do that because primarily as a portrait photographer, when I take the images, sometimes you just get that little bit of change in expression, and I can show you that later on below. But it means I take the pictures in a burst because something may change just a bit between the images. Now, you can see what the retouch looked like, but I shoot in RAW, which means you're always going to have to retouch the images, and this is the way it started. Now, the reason I say it's important to have a reference image, and in Lightroom, it's as simple as this create virtual copy so that you have a copy. Because sometimes when you start working on an image and you're doing a series of retouches, the colors may shift and you may not notice it. I've noticed this on some portraits where shirt colors and things change based on the contrast level that was used, for example. So what that does is it messes with the original image. And by having that reference image that you can look at, you can figure out, why am I off? What am I off by? So we're going to come up here. We're going to use these two images because we'll have a side by side. We'll start off here and let's talk about what to do for a retouch. Now, as you can see, it looks kind of hazy. So we're going to go into develop. When you have haze like that, there is this dehaze setting down here, which is a contrast setting. So we're going to drive that up, and you can see how much better the image looks already. But when you raise contrast, it tends to darken the image a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to balance that out by raising our exposure just a bit. And for this, it's going to be fairly simple. Winter here was a little harsh on the trees. We've had a wet summer in the northeast of the United States, and the trees are a little more muted overall in color than what we would typically see. Now, peak fall foliage is supposed to come out this week, but I've already had trees here that have lost their leaves. So what we're going to do is we're going to give Mother Nature a little bit of an assist here by taking our vibrance and turning it up. In addition, we're going to dial the saturation up just a bit. Now, the difference between the two is saturation is going to do all the colors. Vibrance is kind of taking care of those colors that are typically muted to begin with. Some of the midtones, bring those up and make them pop a little bit more. So we've done nothing with the whites and the blacks. Let's dial that so we get a little bit more dynamic range. And this is, for me, on Windows, holding the Alt key down and dialing it so I've got very little of the white or the black showing up with that Alt key pressed down. And this is what we ended up with. So let's go back here and look at the before and after, if you will. This is where we started out. And this looks blurred because it's still rendering. There we go. So you can see the difference. Now look at the color of the sky. It now has some blues in it. But look at the color of the water. Look at how that's changed just a bit. And that's why I said you always have to have a reference picture to see what changed and are you okay with the change that you got. I like the way the trees came up. You've got this red bush over here, and you can see how much difference there is to the color. how much more that pops. And the green looks a little more green, so the saturation brought that up, and that's probably what changed the water. So if we wanted to, we could go back over here to saturation and take that out. But you'll notice the water hasn't really changed. So it's my vibrance change here that's done it. I think. Nope, it's the dehaze. If I back that dehaze off a little bit, then the water changes back to a little bit more grayish color. But I like the dehaze where it was. I'm going to dial that vibrance back up to 40. Put a click on the saturation here. So the dehaze originally was 75. And what you can always do with settings in Lightroom is you can click on them and type them in. So if you had something that you liked and you want to play with it, just mark the numbers down, and then you can always go back to what they were before. You can always use Control Z, but what I found is sometimes when I do that, I don't go back far enough. So by knowing what all the numbers were in advance, I can put it back exactly the way it was. And here's our picture. Very simple, very straightforward, just upping that vibrance a little bit, a touch of saturation, but make sure that you have a reference photo so that you don't skew the colors when you're going through and making those changes. And now what it looks like it was just a hazy shot that's been cleared up. Even though we've made those other changes, the image still looks like the original, just cleaned up a bit. And now let's talk about why I shoot the way I do when it comes to posing. So here we have this woman. She's not really a reenactor so much as she is someone there to help people understand what life was like at the Fort Ticonderoga Museum, to get an understanding of how things were done back then. And you'll notice that they're pretty much the same, and that's because the camera shoots at such a fast rate. I'm getting about 30 of these a second. But you'll notice the change to her hand, because she was actually working, and you can see the subtle change to her hand. Here's one of the images that I brightened up a little bit and retouched, put a little more contrast in it and things, because this is the one I wanted to go with. But again, look at the color of her outfit. I wanted to make sure that I did not do anything to skew those colors. And I like that one. And there was a second one in here that I liked as well, that just gave the image just a little bit more personality, if you will. Let's get up here to it. It was 995. That one. Just happily working away at the stitching she has in front of her. So when you're doing your retouches, always make sure that you have some kind of reference image that you can work with, so that things don't skew too much. Again, because you're working on them and you're doing things usually in an iterative fashion, you may start to skew things, and then it might just get worse as you go, and you don't notice it because it's a subtle change. Now, Develop module does have that eyeball up at the top. that allow you to turn it all off. But I found that less helpful than having the side by side that I can just pull up and I can look at them. And of course, if you're familiar with Lightroom, you know there's an X and Y down here at the bottom where you can literally pull them up side by side and do that quick comparison as you're going through. So that's what I got for you guys on the technical aspect this week. I hope you found something useful out of this.